Hi guys, again this is Professor Bryan Yves Araneta and this is a remake of my Ecology Part 1 lecture video. Because again, the previous video that I made for this series was not yet in HD. So I felt that this needs an update in terms of the quality. So it's almost comparable to the 3 other parts that I made only recently. And if you haven't seen part 2, 3, and 4 yet, just check my playlist. And also please subscribe to my channel for more biology content. Ecology is the study of the interactions between living organisms and the non-living components of their environment. The term was derived from the Greek word oikos, which means house or environment. Now, what can you say about the organisms in this mangrove ecosystem here? What are the possible interactions that can happen here? How about in this coral reef or this rice fish polyculture system? Ecology is basic science that explores life's diversity in a particular space and time. So how these interacting entities develop through time, including the flow of energy that allows these natural processes to work. A related field called environmental science is a more applied discipline with sociocultural implications, and you can check it out in part 4 of this series. The primary theme in ecology is interdependence. It looks into the interconnectedness and the complementary nature of both living and non-living agents in the whole picture. Organisms depend on each other and their environments, while environments can also be shaped by its inhabitants. The toad here enjoys the water and the plants that provide oxygen and cover. But in return, it provides plants with carbon dioxide and minerals that they can use for plenty of its anabolic processes. Or maybe it can also control the population of aquatic insects. The relationship between a bee and a flower is also a good example to define interconnectedness. A nectar for pollination services. Birds can also be an agent of seed dispersal for this tree in exchange for shelter and food for its young. The fourth picture here is a backyard aquaponic system where these so-called beneficial interactions are put into good use to produce healthy food and promote sustainability in this ever-demanding world we have. Interdependence is not always a beneficial thing. Organisms are made to work optimally in a balanced environment. Thus, disturbance or disruptions can have bad effects to the members of a system. In this picture, sea stars prey on sea urchins. So human activities that can result to the decline of sea star populations can result to ecosystem upsets. Without the necessary predation pressure, urchin populations will flourish, and they will end up decimating seaweed and seagrass stands. And besides this obvious effect, there are other outcomes that we do not yet know. So we only rely on the resilience of ecosystems in regulating its own problems. Ecology is extremely complex and difficult to study. Now, to deal with this complexity, conceptual, graphical, or mathematical ecological models can be used to represent or describe the components of an ecological system. Take this graph, for example, of predator and prey trends in population growth through time. Here, there seemed to be an alternating decrease and increase in both prey and predator population at regular intervals. We can expect prey populations to go down when predators are plenty. But when there is less to eat, the predator population also declines due to hunger or decrease in reproductive activity. Then the cycle repeats. This model can be confirmed in real environments, and it can also be expressed in mathematical forms like this. So this is a kind of differential function because we're talking of rates here. Now just pause this video and figure it out yourselves. I wouldn't mind for now. So let's proceed. Let's now go into the levels of organization at the ecosystem level. If you can still recall the organization from cells to tissues to organs and the organ systems in the organismic level, here the lowest entity in the ecosystem level is the organism, which is a single member of a species. And then this is upgraded to several members that comprises the population. And if you have more than two populations together in a particular area, we are now looking into a community living in a specific place and time. On the other hand, how does an ecosystem differ to a community? Guys, just add the non-living components that affects the community, and we now have an ecosystem. The biosphere in the broadest sense includes all the regions of the Earth that has life in it. It's the totality of all habitats and their associated organisms, from the atmosphere to the hydrosphere and the lithosphere, again as long as there's life in them. Each of these levels has unique characteristics, so a complete study of ecology needs to look at each level meticulously. So one has to focus investigations on one level of organization while recognizing that it is influenced by processes at other levels. It is thus important to note that ecosystems have both the biotic or living and the abiotic or non-living components. Now what can you see in this picture here? The plants and animals and the microbes, and then you can have here the physicochemical factors such as sunlight, water availability, pH, and the likes. The physical environment is usually static, or shall we say less dynamic. It is the organisms that adjust to it. They face the various changes that happen to ensure their survival. Each organism is able to survive within a limited range of environmental conditions. For example, an organism may be able to function only within a specific range of temperatures. It is possible to determine the range for an organism by measuring how efficiently it performs at different temperatures. A graph of performance versus values of an environmental variable, such as temperature, is called a tolerance curve, as shown here. Organisms can adjust their tolerance to abiotic factors through the process of acclimation. Shown here is a mangrove clam in the wild and the same species in my home aquarium. Since there is a difference between these two environments, we should expect that the clams made efforts to adjust from a brackish to freshwater environment, and they survived for almost 2 years now. We can thus categorize organisms as conformers if they do not have the capacity to regulate their internal conditions. Now they change as their external environment changes. And of course, they die if the environment is no longer within their tolerance values. Regulators use energy to control some of their internal conditions, so they can keep it within the optimal range over a wide variety of environments. When the environment is hostile, organisms can adopt several strategies to survive, aside from simply tolerating the conditions. These desert snakes and rats here only hunt at night when it is cooler. Polar bears can enter into a dormant state by lowering their activities and metabolism during winter. Also, when hosts are not around, this leech can also stay dormant in the mud. Migration is also a common strategy to look for food or spawning grounds, as in the case of these tunas here. Migratory birds also search for food and warmer temperature during winter. Now, species do not use or occupy all parts of their habitat at once. The specific role or way of life of a species within its environment is its niche. The niche includes the range of conditions that the species can tolerate, the resources it uses, the methods by which it obtains resources, even the number of offspring it has, its time of reproduction, and all other interactions within its environment. Now, can you describe or characterize the niche of these red-bellied piranhas? Maybe they have a role as predators, but they may also be limited by larger organisms that can eat them too. If there is no fresh meat in their environment, perhaps they can also eat plants and decaying animals too. And they are only limited in freshwater environments. This is also part of their niche. In terms of niches, we can classify an organism as a specialist and a generalist. Specialists have narrow niches with limited choice of resources and lesser tolerance to a wide range of environments. This dugong, for example, only eats seagrasses. Generalists have broad niches that can tolerate a range of conditions and use a variety of resources. Now, try to figure out why I place crabs as generalist here. Let us now look at how energy flows through the ecosystem. In an ecosystem, energy flows from the sun to autotrophs, then to organisms that eat them, and then to organisms that feed on other organisms. The amount of energy an ecosystem receives and the amount that is transferred from organism to organism affect the ecosystem structure. For example, diversity and production is high in tropical areas because the amount of sunlight there is plenty for the producers and the consumers that depend on them. Let's look closely at the producers. Obviously, they can perform photosynthesis, where raw materials such as carbon dioxide and water are made into organic molecules to build biomass. There is also a process called chemosynthesis, where organisms derive their energy from the chemical reactions and heat coming out of the earth. This is a community of tube worms, mussels, and crustaceans and bacteria that you can find in the dark zones or aphotic zones of the ocean. In this equation, bacteria utilizes hydrogen sulfide as an energy source to drive the production of sugar. The bacteria then passes the chemical energy to the larger organisms such as mussels and tube worms. Gross primary productivity is the rate at which producers in an ecosystem capture solar energy to produce biomass in the form of organic compounds. This, however, cannot be measured because as soon as energy is produced to form biomass, it's immediately used in a variety of metabolic processes. That is the reason why the more practical value of productivity, called the net primary productivity, is measured. So just think about measuring only what is left in the tissues of producers after the energy expenditures for the day are paid up. Producers do not, in essence, make food for the non-producers. Now, what the consumers grab are simply the leftovers in the tissues of the producers. Here is a graph to compare the production of various ecosystems. This is in terms of dry weight per square meter per year. Obviously, deserts can offer the least. There is plenty of sun there but less water. Open oceans also have little productivity here too. Why is that so? The ocean is so vast, right? Actually, the entire biomass of the oceans can exceed that of other regions of the earth. But always remember that we have to consider the volume that's in the denominator. So the resulting production is a small number when expressed per square meter. We have here grasslands, savannas, and lakes. They are quite comparable. And we have the two largest productivity in estuaries and tropical forests. We can attribute this to the amount of nutrients in an estuary, where runoff carries plenty of nutrients, while water availability and amount of sunlight can be the contributing factor in the production in tropical rainforests. Okay, what about the consumers? All animals, most protists, all fungi, and many bacteria are heterotrophs that cannot manufacture their own food, but instead they get energy by eating other organisms or organic wastes. Hippos are herbivores that eat plants. Sharks obviously are carnivores, they are predators, while birds can eat both plants and animals. Detritivores extract organic detritus from the substrate like this sea cucumber, while microbes are usually known to function as decomposers by metabolizing dead organisms to return nutrients back to the environment. It is best to look at models of energy transfers in food chains and food webs. Again, these are examples of an ecological model that I showed you a while ago. A food chain is a simplistic and linear depiction of energy transfers, while we have a more complex interconnections here in a food web. Let's also define what a trophic level is. It's the position of an organism relative to other organisms in the sequence of energy transfers. Humans, for example, who are considered top consumers, are at the highest trophic level. Also take note that sooner or later, organisms, as humans, we die. And if we were not consumed by other organisms, there must be a mechanism to degrade the biomass of the dead animals and plants. So you should be able to bring them back into usable nutrients like minerals and organic compounds, or else we'll end up with piles of dead trees and plants while our oceans filled with dead fish. So again, thanks to the microbial world who are given this essential task. Decomposition and nutrient cycling is a valuable resource. Collectively, we have ecological processes called biogeochemical cycles that continue to recycle dead biomass to be used by newly formed life forms. Let's start with the water cycle. Bodies of water such as lakes, rivers, streams, and oceans contain a substantial percentage of the Earth's water. The atmosphere also contains water in the form of water vapor. Water in the soil or in underground formations of porous rock is known as groundwater. The movement of water between these various reservoirs is known as the water cycle. Three important processes in the water cycle are evaporation, transpiration, and precipitation. Evaporation adds water as water vapor to the atmosphere. Heat causes water to evaporate from the bodies of water, from the soil, and from the bodies of living things and the oceans. The process by which water evaporates from the leaves of plants in terrestrial ecosystems is called transpiration. It causes plants to take in water through the roots to replace the water that is being lost through their leaves. Animals also participate in the water cycle. They drink water or obtain it from their food, and then they release this water when they breathe, sweat, or excrete. Then water leaves the atmosphere through precipitation after they condense in the clouds. And the amount of water the atmosphere can hold depends on abiotic factors such as temperature and air pressure. Once the atmosphere becomes saturated with water vapor, precipitation occurs in the form of rain or snow or fog. This can then become runoff that goes into rivers, then back to the oceans. Some of it infiltrate the soil and becomes groundwater that appear to be stored water. But actually, sooner or later, they will still be discharged to the oceans. The carbon cycle. Photosynthesis and cellular respiration form the basis of the short-term carbon cycle. Plants and other autotrophs use carbon dioxide along with water and solar energy to make carbohydrates. Now both autotrophs and heterotrophs use oxygen to break down carbohydrates during cellular respiration. The byproducts of cellular respiration are carbon dioxide and water. Decomposers release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere when they break down organic compounds. Humans also dug stored carbon from fossil fuels and burn them to produce electricity and run vehicles. The carbon dioxide from the emissions are also used to produce more productivity. You can see these processes in this picture. Photosynthesis builds plant biomass that can be introduced into the soil and keep them there via carbon sequestration that will eventually end up as fossil pools. Let's now have the nitrogen cycle. Now all organisms need nitrogen to make proteins and nucleic acids. The complex pathway that nitrogen follows in an ecosystem is called the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen gas, or N2, makes up almost 78% of the atmosphere, so it might seem that it would be readily available for living things. However, most plants can only use nitrogen in the form of nitrate via nitrogen fixation by bacteria. The bodies of dead organisms contain nitrogen, mainly in proteins and nucleic acids. Decomposers break down these materials and release the nitrogen they contain as ammonia, or NH3, which can also become ammonium. And this process is known as ammonification. Through this process, nitrogen is again made available to other organisms. Ammonium can also be oxidized into nitrites, NO2, and nitrates in a process called nitrification. The erosion of nitrate-rich rocks also releases nitrates into an ecosystem. Plants use nitrates to form amino acids, and the nitrogen is returned to the atmosphere through denitrification by breaking down nitrites or nitrates. Plants can absorb nitrates from the water and soil. Animals obtain nitrogen in the same way they obtain energy, by eating plants and other organisms, and then digesting their proteins and nucleic acids. Phosphorus, on the other hand, is an element that is an essential material needed by animals to form bones, teeth, and parts of molecules such as DNA and RNA. Plants get the phosphorus they need from soil and water, whereas animals get their phosphorus by eating plants or other animals. When rocks erode, small amounts of phosphorus dissolve as phosphate in the soil and in the water. Phosphorus is also added to soil and water when excess phosphorus is excreted in wastes from organisms and when organisms die and decompose. Some phosphorus applied to fields as fertilizer washes off the land into streams and groundwater. So that's it, guys. I hope that this still retained the original information that I included in the old version. Again, also watch the remaining 3 parts of this series. Thank you very much for watching. Again, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And also please like and share this video if it was helpful. Bye-bye.